There was a moment so small that it barely seemed to matter. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, no raised voices or sudden endings, just a feeling that passed through him, quick and sharp, like a thought he did not question. He reacted without knowing he was reacting. And then life continued as it always does, quietly moving forward. At the time, it felt ordinary, almost invisible, a single response shaped by emotion, shaped by habit. He believed it would fade by morning. He believed time would soften it. After all, how much weight could one moment carry? But moments do not always leave when we expect them to. Some stay, not loudly. They settle deep, where days turn into patterns and patterns turn into years. He did not notice the cost right away. Life still looked full on the surface. Conversations continued. Days passed. Laughter appeared when it was expected. Yet somewhere beneath all of it, something had shifted. A quiet tension lived inside him, a sense that something had been lost, though he could not name it. Have you ever felt that? That strange feeling where nothing is clearly wrong, yet nothing feels fully right either. It was not regret at first. Regret is too clear, too sharp. This was softer, a dull awareness that his inner world no longer felt calm. He replayed small exchanges in his mind, not because they were important, but because they never found rest. His thoughts returned to that moment again and again, as if asking a question he refused to answer. Why did I speak then? Why did I let myself be pulled? He told himself it did not matter, that reacting was natural, that silence would have changed nothing. And yet, something in him knew otherwise. Something quieter than logic. Something that watched instead of argued. As time moved on, the moment grew heavier, not because of what happened, but because of what followed. Each reaction after that first one felt easier, faster, less considered, like a door that had been opened and never fully closed again. He did not lose 10 years all at once. No one does. He lost them slowly, in pieces so small they felt harmless. In emotional responses that stole energy, in words that could not be taken back, in silence that came too late. The strange thing was that nothing outside him demanded this loss. They did not force it. They did not even notice it. The cost was paid inwardly, where no one else could see. And still there were moments of quiet clarity, late at night, early in the morning, when the world felt distant and his own thoughts grew louder. In those moments he sensed a truth waiting patiently, a truth that did not accuse him. It simply waited to be seen, that the real mistake was not what he felt. Feelings come and go. The mistake was believing every feeling deserved an answer, that every inner disturbance required a reaction. Silence, he would later understand, was not emptiness. It was space, space where understanding could have grown, space where dignity could have remained intact. But back then, he did not know this, or perhaps he knew, but chose not to listen. Listening requires stillness, and stillness can feel uncomfortable when emotions are loud. So the moment passed, quietly, almost kindly, and life continued. Only much later would he see that this was the beginning, not of pain, but of a lesson delayed. A lesson about time and how easily it can slip away when inner discipline is absent. A lesson about how the smallest reaction can open a path that leads far from peace. And as he sat alone with these thoughts, he wondered something simple, something gentle. How many moments like this pass, unnoticed, in a lifetime? And how many years? Do they quietly carry with them? After that moment, silence began to feel different. It was no longer peaceful. It carried weight. It followed him into the quiet parts of the day and stayed beside him when everything else fell still. What once felt like rest now felt like pressure, as if unspoken thoughts were asking to be heard. He noticed it most when nothing was happening, when there were no voices around him, when the world offered no distraction. In those spaces, his feelings rose gently but persistently, not demanding attention, just waiting to see if he would listen or turn away again. Silence has a way of doing that. It does not rush. It does not argue. It simply remains. At first, he tried to fill it with thoughts, with memories, with imagined conversations that never truly happened. He told himself that thinking was the same as understanding, but the more he filled the silence, the heavier it became, as if it was asking for something simpler, something slower. There were moments when he almost spoke, almost explained himself, almost reacted again. The urge would rise suddenly, warm and convincing. It whispered that relief was close, just one response away. That expression would ease the pressure inside. But each time he imagined speaking, something held him back. A quiet hesitation, not fear exactly, more like an inner pause, a sense that words might bring movement but not peace. Have you ever felt that pause? That moment when silence feels uncomfortable, yet strangely honest? He began to realize that the discomfort was not silence itself. It was what silence revealed, feelings he had not named, emotions he had not allowed to pass fully through him, thoughts that had been pushed aside too quickly in the past. Without reaction, these feelings had nowhere to go. They did not disappear. They settled. They waited. At times the weight felt unfair. Why should he carry this alone? Why should silence ask so much of him? Others spoke freely. Others reacted without consequence, it seemed. They moved on quickly, untouched by the echoes of their own words. But he did not move on. Something in him stayed behind, watching, observing the space between feeling and action, learning slowly what that space contained. He noticed that when he stayed silent, his emotions changed shape. At first they were sharp, restless. Then, with time, they softened, not gone but quieter, less urgent, as if they were being heard simply by being allowed to exist. This was new to him. The idea that not responding could be a form of care, that restraint could be an act of listening rather than suppression. Still, the heaviness did not vanish. Silence asks for patience, and patience does not come easily when the heart feels unsettled. There were nights when the quiet felt endless, when questions circled without answers, when he wondered if holding back was costing him something vital. Was he losing himself by staying quiet? Or was he finally eating himself for the first time? The answers did not arrive clearly. They never do. Instead, understanding came in small shifts, in how his breathing slowed when he stopped resisting the quiet, in how his thoughts became less tangled when he did not chase them. He began to see that silence was not asking him to disappear. It was asking him to remain present, to sit with what was real without trying to change it too quickly. They might have mistaken his quiet for weakness. They might have believed he had nothing to say. But inside, something was forming, not words but awareness, not arguments but clarity. Silence, he learned, is not empty. It is full of unspoken truth. And when it feels heavy, it is often because it is holding something important, something not yet understood, something waiting to be respected. So he stayed with it, not bravely, not confidently, just honestly, one quiet moment at a time, and though the weight remained, it no longer felt meaningless. It felt like the beginning of something deeper, a slow understanding that inner discomfort is not always a sign to act. Sometimes it is an invitation to stay still. Over time, he began to notice something else. The way they looked at him had changed. Not openly, not unkindly, just slightly, as if they were seeing only a surface and mistaking it for the whole. They noticed his quiet. They noticed his pauses. They noticed what he no longer explained, and in the absence of explanation, they filled the space themselves. They assumed he did not care, or that he had nothing to say. Some believed he was distant. Others thought he was cold. A few decided he was weak for not responding the way they expected. None of them asked why. This was not said aloud. It never is. Misunderstanding rarely announces itself. It grows silently, fed by assumptions and unfinished stories. He felt it in small moments, in glances that lingered too long, in words that carried an edge they did not have before. At first, it confused him. He wondered how silence could be so easily mistaken, how choosing not to react could look like emptiness to those standing outside. He felt the old urge return. The urge to explain, to correct their view, to show them what was really happening inside him. The words lined up in his mind, ready to be released. If only they knew, he thought. If only they understood. But understanding cannot be forced. And being understood is not always within our control. This realization hurt more than he expected, not sharply but slowly, like a quiet sadness settling in his chest. He did not want to be misseen. No one does. There is a deep human wish to be recognized for who we truly are, and yet the more he watched, the more he saw something gentle hidden within this pain. They were reacting to an image, not to him. They responded to what silence looked like from the outside, not to what it held. He began to see that their judgment said less about him and more about they. Our need for noise, for certainty, for visible emotion. Silence unsettles those who rely on reactions to feel grounded. Still, knowing this did not make it easy. There were evenings when he replayed their words in his mind, wondering if staying quiet had been a mistake, wondering if dignity was worth the loneliness that sometimes followed. Is it better to be understood falsely or not understood at all? This question stayed with him. It did not demand an answer. It simply waited. He noticed that when he imagined speaking just to be understood, his chest felt tight, heavy, as if the words would cost him something he could not afford to lose. But when he accepted being misunderstood, a strange calm followed, not happiness, just steadiness. He began to sense a quiet truth that clarity inside oneself is more stable than approval from others, that being misjudged does not change who you are unless you allow it to. They continued to form their stories. He did not stop them. He could N.O.T. Stories grow where silence lives. That is their nature. But something shifted in him. He stopped listening as closely to what they might think, not because it no longer hurt, but because it no longer defined him. He realized that explaining himself over and over would only keep him tied to their expectations. And expectations can become a kind of cage, even when they are kind. There is a particular strength in allowing others to misunderstand you when you understand yourself clearly. It is a quiet strength, one that does not defend or perform, one that rests. Still, he did not feel superior. There was no pride in this realization, only acceptance, a soft letting go of the need to be seen in a certain way. As the nights grew quieter, he noticed that the silence around him felt different again. Less heavy, more honest. It no longer asked him to prove anything. They may never know his reasons, they may never see the care behind his restraint, and slowly he began to accept that. This was not a failure. It was simply the cost of choosing an inner path. To walk quietly while others speak loudly. To remain steady while being misunderstood. And as he sat with this truth, listening to his own breathing in the stillness, he felt something settle deep within him, a calm understanding that not everyone needs to understand you, and that sometimes silence is not what hides you. It is what keeps you whole. As time passed, he began to notice a quiet pattern, not in others, but in himself. Each time he reacted, something small was taken from him, not all at once, not enough to alarm him, just enough to leave a faint trace behind. A reaction always felt brief in the moment, a few words, a look, a decision made quickly. Then it was over, or so it seemed. But later, when the noise faded, the weight remained. A tiredness he could not explain, a restlessness that did not belong to the present moment. He started to wonder why. Why did a single response linger so long after it was spoken? Why did his mind return to moments that were already gone? Slowly, he saw it. Every reaction demanded energy, emotional energy, attention, presence. And once given, it did not return easily. It scattered, attaching itself to memory, to doubt, to imagined outcomes. A reaction asked him to relive the moment again and again, to defend it, to justify it, to wish it had gone differently. And in that quiet replaying, time slipped by. He noticed how a single reaction could color an entire day, how a brief emotional moment could shape his thoughts long after it had ended. The world around him moved forward, but part of him stayed behind, occupied by something that no longer existed. This was the hidden cost. Not the reaction itself, but the echo it left behind. He remembered times when he had stayed silent instead. Those moments had faded naturally. They did not follow him. They did not ask for his attention later. Silence closed gently, like a door that did not creak. But reactions stayed open. They invited thought after thought, feeling after feeling, until the present moment felt crowded by the past. Have you ever noticed how quickly the body recovers from stillness, but how slowly it recovers from emotional strain? He did not blame himself for reacting. It was human, instinctive, often born from a desire to protect or be seen. Yet understanding this did not erase the cost. It only made it clearer. Each reaction shaped how he saw himself. A sharp word made him feel sharp inside. A defensive response made him feel guarded long after the need had passed. Over time, these inner states became familiar, almost normal. He wondered how many parts of himself had been formed this way, not through choice, but through repeated reactions. And then there was time. Time moved quietly, like it always does. Days did not announce themselves. Years did not ask permission. They passed while he was busy carrying the weight of moments that could not be anged. He realized that the cost of reacting was not paid immediately. It was delayed, paid in lost calm, in shortened patience, in the subtle narrowing of inner space. No one else saw this. From the outside, everything looked ordinary, but inside he felt the difference. A mind that rarely rested fully, a heart that took longer to settle. There were moments when he asked himself a gentle question. Is this reaction worth the time it will take to release it? The question did not always stop him, but it lingered. And that was enough to begin changing something. He started to see reactions as exchanges, a trade, emotional energy given for temporary relief, words exchanged for a brief sense of control, and often the price was higher than expected. Not reacting, he noticed, asked for something too. Restraint, discomfort, patience. But it did not ask for time afterward. Once the moment passed, it truly passed. This understanding arrived quietly, not as a rule, not as a lesson taught by another. It came from observation, from sitting with himself long enough to notice what remained after each choice. He did not vow to never react again. That would have been another kind of struggle. Instead, he simply became aware. Awareness softened his movements, slowed his responses. He began to see time differently. Not as something distant, but as something shaped by inner decisions, how it could be stretched by peace or fragmented by unrest. And as this understanding settled in, a quiet respect grew within him. Respect for his own energy, for his own inner life. Because once you see the true cost of every reaction, you begin to treat your silence with greater care, not as absence, but as protection. There came a day that felt no different from the ones before it. The light was the same, the air felt familiar, nothing marked it as important, and yet something inside him shifted quietly without asking for attention. He had grown used to watching himself, watching his thoughts rise and fall, watching emotions pass through like weather. On this day, instead of being pulled by them, he simply noticed them. And in that noticing, a gentle clarity appeared. It was not sudden. It did not arrive like a revelation. It felt more like recognition, as if he were seeing something that had always been there, waiting for him to slow down enough to notice. He saw himself clearly, not the version shaped by their opinions, not the self formed by past reactions or imagined futures. Just the simple presence that existed beneath all of it. Quiet, observing, steady. This realization did not judge him. It did not list his mistakes or praise his restraint. It simply showed him where his true strength lived. Not in what he said or withheld, but in the space from which both arose. He noticed how often he had moved away from himself, how quickly he had reached outward when something stirred inside, seeking relief, seeking confirmation, seeking release. And now, for the first time, he stayed with the feeling without trying to shape it, without trying to explain it away, without asking it to become something else. Have you ever experienced that moment when you stop trying to fix yourself and simply listen? In that stillness, he understood something simple and profound. His emotions were not enemies, they were signals. But signals did not require immediate action. They required attention. He saw how often he had confused urgency with importance, how every strong feeling had felt like a call to act, and how exhausting that had been. This new clarity showed him another path, a path where feelings could rise without ruling him, where thoughts could appear without demanding belief. It was not control in the harsh sense. It was alignment, a quiet agreement between awareness and emotion. He realized that his power had never been lost. It had only been scattered, given away in reactions, left behind in moments he no longer lived in. And now, slowly, it was returning, not rushing, not insisting, just gathering piece by piece in the simple act of presence. He felt a soft sadness for the years spent unaware, for the energy spent proving, defending, reacting. But the sadness was gentle, free of regret. Because this understanding had arrived when it was ready to be received, there was no need to punish the past. It had carried him here. As he sat with this realization, he felt something unfamiliar but comforting, a sense of wholeness, as if parts of himself that had been scattered were quietly coming home. He did not feel superior. He did not feel finished. He felt grounded. The world outside him had not changed. They were still the same. Circumstances still unfolded as they always had, but his relationship to them was different. He saw that he did not need to be louder to be real. He did not need to be faster to be alive. His worth was not measured by response, but by awareness. This understanding settled deep in him, like a stone placed gently at the bottom of a clear pool. It did not disturb the surface, it gave it depth. He began to trust this inner stillness, to recognize it as a place he could return to, a place untouched by misunderstanding or reaction, and in trusting it he felt something rare, relief. Not the relief that comes from release or explanation, but the relief of no longer being divided within himself. For the first time in a long while, he was not watching himself from a distance. He was here, present, whole, and in that quiet clarity he understood that this moment, unnoticed by the world, was one of the most important of his life. After that understanding settled within him, something subtle began to change in the way he moved through moments. The pause between feeling and action grew wider, not forced, not deliberate. It simply appeared like a quiet space opening where there had once been urgency. When emotions rose, he noticed them. The familiar warmth in the chest, the tightening of thought, the impulse to respond. But now, instead of stepping forward, he stayed where he was, and nothing collapsed. At first, this surprised him. He had believed that not responding meant losing something, losing position, losing voice, losing himself. Yet when he remained silent, he felt none of that disappear. Instead, something else stayed intact: his dignity. There were moments when they spoke in ways that once would have pulled him outward, words that hinted, words that pressed lightly, inviting reaction. He felt the invitation clearly. It stood right in front of him, warm and convincing. All he had to do was answer, but he didn't. He let the moment pass through him, like a wave that rises and falls without leaving a mark. The urge softened, the tension eased, and when it was over, he noticed something important. He had not betrayed himself by staying quiet. He had protected something fragile and valuable. Silence, he began to understand, as not avoidance. It was choice, a conscious turning inward rather than outward, a way of saying, without words, that his inner balance mattered. There was discomfort in this choice. Silence did not always feel calm at first. Sometimes it felt like standing still while everything inside wanted to move, like holding a breath longer than expected. But each time he chose not to react, the discomfort passed more quickly, and each time a quiet strength remained behind. Have you ever noticed how some strength is loud while other strength barely makes a sound? He saw now that reacting had often been a way to seek relief, a way to release pressure quickly. Silence asked him to carry that pressure a little longer, but in doing so it spared him the long echo of regret. He did not feel triumphant in these moments. There was no sense of winning, only a steady feeling of alignment, as if his inner world and his outer actions were no longer pulling in opposite directions. They may have a response. They may have waited for it. And when it did not come, the moment ended on its own, without conflict, without explanation. This was new to him. The idea that not everything needed to be resolved outwardly, that some things resolve themselves when left untouched. He began to see silence as a kind of boundary, Not a wall, but a gentle line drawn with care, a way of saying, "This is where I remain whole." There were still times when words were necessary. Silence was not a rule, it was a presence. He spoke when clarity asked for it, not when emotion demanded it, and this difference mattered. He felt less scattered afterward, less pulled into thought. Moments ended cleanly without leaving traces behind. His mind rested more easily, his body followed. Slowly, he noticed a change in how he saw himself. He trusted his restraint, he respected his pauses. He no longer felt weak for holding back, he felt grounded. Self-respect, he realized, is not built through defense. It is built through discernment, through knowing when to step forward and when to remain still. Silence became a companion rather than a burden. It stood beside him in difficult moments, steady and unafraid. It did not promise comfort. It offered clarity, and clarity was enough. As nights passed and quiet moments returned, he felt a deepening calm, not excitement, not pride, just a sense of being rooted where he stood. He had chosen silence over reaction, not once, but again and again. And with each choice, something within him grew firmer, less shaken by misunderstanding, less tempted by immediate release. He understood now that inner power does not rush to be seen. It waits, it watches, it holds. And in that holding, it remains unbroken. With time, the changes within him became quieter but deeper. There were no sudden turns, no moments that demanded attention. Growth arrived the way morning light does, slowly, without announcement. If he had not been watching closely, he might have missed it. He noticed that his silence no longer felt like effort. It had become natural, almost instinctive. Where he once felt tension, there was now space. Where he once felt pressure to respond, there was ease. Strength was forming, but it did not look the way he once imagined strength should look. It did not push. It did not insist. It did not seek to be recognized. It simply remained. He felt it most in moments that once unsettled him. Situations that previously stirred his emotions now passed through him with less disturbance. Not because he felt less, but because he trusted himself more. He trusted that he did not need to prove his depth through words. He trusted that his calm did not need validation. He trusted that not every feeling required expression to be real. Have you ever noticed how true strength rarely asks to be noticed? They still spoke. They still acted as they always had. Some continued to misunderstand him, others adjusted quietly, sensing the shift without naming it. But none of that mattered as much as it once did. His inner world had grown steadier. Emotional discipline had reshaped him gently, not by force, but by consistency, by returning again and again to the choice of restraint, by allowing feelings to rise and settle without turning them into actions. He saw now that restraint was not suppression. Suppression pushes inward with tension. Restraint holds with care. It allows emotion to exist without letting it spill into places where it does not belong. This distinction changed everything. His thoughts became clearer, less crowded. He spent less time revisiting moments that had already passed. His attention returned to the present more easily, like a bird finding its way home. There was a quiet dignity in this way of being, a dignity that did not come from being right, but from being whole. He no longer measured himself by how strongly he reacted, but by how gently he could remain steady, and something unexpected followed. Peace. Not the kind that erases difficulty, not the kind that promises comfort, but a peace that coexists with challenge, that remains even when circumstances are uncertain. It was the peace of knowing he could trust himself. He could trust his silence. He could trust his timing. He could trust that his inner balance would not disappear simply because the outer world shifted. This trust was built slowly, one restrained moment at a time, one quiet decision layered over another, until it formed a foundation beneath him. There were still days when emotions rose strongly, days when old habits whispered, inviting him back into reaction. He did not judge these moments, he met them with patience. He understood now that growth is not the absence of impulse, it is the presence of awareness, and awareness, once cultivated, does not leave easily. As he walked through his days, he carried less tension in his body, his movements softened. His breathing deepened without effort. Noise inside him had faded, replaced by something simple and steady: stillness. This stillness did not separate him from life. It allowed him to meet life more fully, without resistance, without haste. He began to see that inner power does not announce itself. It does not rush forward when challenged. It does not retreat when questioned. It stands quietly, rooted in self-respect, and self-respect, he learned, grows when you stop abandoning yourself in moments of pressure, when you stay, when you listen, when you allow silence to speak on your behalf. As night returned and the world grew quiet once more, he sat with himself in that familiar stillness. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like home. He did not feel finished. There was no sense of arrival, only a calm awareness that something important had taken shape within him. A strength that did not speak. A strength that did not need to. And in that quiet knowing he rested. Time began to feel different after that. Not faster, not slower, just quieter, as if it no longer needed to announce itself to be felt. Days still passed, but they passed without leaving so many marks behind. He noticed this most in the mornings and the evenings, when the world softened and sounds grew distant. His mind no longer rushed ahead or lingered behind. It rested where he was. There was a sense of return, not to a place but to himself. He realized that much of his time had once been spent elsewhere, in imagined conversations, in replayed moments, in emotional reactions that stretched far beyond their origin. Time had been present, but his attention had not always been with it. Now it was. This did not make life easier in every way. Difficult moments still appeared. Silence did not remove uncertainty, but it changed how he carried them. He no longer felt scattered across past and future. He felt gathered. Have you ever noticed how peace is less about what happens and more about where you stand when it does? He sank more firmly now, not rigid, just steady. When something stirred inside him, he noticed it and allowed it to pass. When nothing stirred, he enjoyed the stillness without trying to fill it. Silence had become familiar, not something to endure, but something to trust. He no longer feared being overlooked or misunderstood. Those things still happened, but they no longer reached as deeply. He knew where he stood within himself, and that knowledge did not depend on reflection from others. There was a quiet confidence in this. Not confidence that speaks, confidence that settles. He understood now that self-respect is not built through assertion alone. It is built through consistency, through choosing alignment over impulse, through remaining present when reaction would be easier. This self-respect did not isolate him. It softened him, made him less defensive, more open, because he was no longer protecting fragile ground. His inner footing was secure. Moments ended cleanly now, with lingering tension, without the need to revisit. When silence followed an exchange, it felt complete, not unfinished. He carried less weight into each new day, and in that lightness he noticed something almost tender: gratitude, not dramatic, just a quiet appreciation for the simplicity of being undisturbed within. He did not look back often. The past no longer asked for attention. It had taught what it needed to teach. The lesson had been received. He had not reclaimed lost years. Time does not return in that way. But he had reclaimed something else: presence. And presence, he found, makes time feel whole. As nights grew deeper and the world settled into stillness, he sat with himself, listening to the soft rhythm of his own breathing. There was no need to reflect further, no need to search for meaning. Meaning had already arrived. It lived in the space between thoughts, in the pause before response, in the calm that followed restraint. He felt strong but not tense, peaceful but not withdrawn, awake but not restless. This was not an ending. It was not a beginning either. It was a continuation, carried forward with greater care. He knew now that silence would always be part of his life, not as absence, but as presence, not as avoidance, but as depth. And if moments came when he was tested again, when emotions rose sharply, he trusted himself to meet them quietly, without haste, without fear. He had learned where his power lived, not in reaction, not in explanation, but in the steady, unspoken knowing of who he was. And as the quiet held him, he remained there, calm, rooted, at peace with the time that moved gently around him.